Okay, this is text problem 11.8, and it's from chapter 11 of your textbook. And it says for us to suppose that there's a temporary but significant increase in oil prices in an economy with an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve. As a policy response to this short-lived but sudden increase in oil prices, what can the central bank do? So our choices are, can the central bank stabilize both the price level and the real GDP simultaneously? Can they stabilize neither the price level nor the GDP? Do they have no responsibility to stabilize the GDP? Or can they not stabilize both the price level and the GDP simultaneously? I think the best way to start off with this is by drawing the picture, and we'll look at how things change. So grab a pen here, and let's draw our economy. So we have an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve, which always looks sort of like this, right? So this is my short-run aggregate supply. And then I always have a downward sloping aggregate demand. And remember that my horizontal axis is GDP, or the level of output that the economy is capable of producing or demanding or whatever. And my vertical axis is price level, which gives us some indication of inflation. So we're told what happens is that we have a temporary but significant increase in oil prices in the economy. So what happens now is our price level, for some reason, goes up from what was our equilibrium price here, PE, to a higher level. So we've got a new price, which also will mean, based on our aggregate demand curve, that we have a new GDP, or quantity demanded, or however you want to really think about this. But when we're talking in aggregate terms, usually we were talking about our overall GDP, or output of the economy. So our GDP goes down from the equilibrium, GDP equilibrium, to a new GDP, GDP 1, and our price is price 1. Okay, so we've got this shock to the economy. Our prices have gone up, our GDP has gone down. So the question is, what can the central bank do about it? Let's think about what the role of the central bank is, or what their options are. They can employ expansionary policy, or they can employ contractionary policy. Expansionary policy is when they put more money into the economy. And contractionary policy is where they pull back and pull money out of the economy, or out of consumers' hands. So what they're really doing is affecting the aggregate demand curve for the economy by how much money's floating around out there. How much can people do with money? How much do consumers have to spend or to invest, or whatever consumers are going to do with their money? So these are the central bank's only options: expansionary or contractionary. So they can either increase aggregate demand with expansionary policy, or they can decrease aggregate demand with contractionary policy. And those are their only two options. So let's look at the graph and see what happens to price and GDP with each of these two options, because their goal is to stabilize us and get us back to our original equilibrium, right? So remember, we have higher prices and lower GDP than we did before this shock. They want to get us back. So if they use their contractionary policy, they would create a demand curve that looks something like this, the red one. So what happens here? Now we are able to bring our price back down, because now we have our demand crossing our aggregate supply down at a lower level. The way I've drawn it, it's actually lower than the original equilibrium, but you can imagine if I had drawn it a little bit differently, it could cross at the original price equilibrium. So we've brought aggregate demand down, and which means we can bring our price down, but we've also, look what we've done. We've also brought our GDP down, or left it down lower than our original equilibrium. So by employing their contractionary policy, they can sort of fix the price, but they can't fix the GDP. So their other option is expansionary policy, which we'll show in green. So if they increase aggregate demand, now they have increased our GDP. Now we've even got a better GDP than we had at our original equilibrium. We've got our green GDP, so they can increase the GDP with expansionary policy, but look what happens to price. The price is still, the way I've drawn it, the price now is actually a little bit lower than the higher price that I had drawn, but it's still above our desired equilibrium price. So they can fix the GDP but not the price with expansionary policy. So their only two options are the red line or the green line. With the red line, they fix price but not GDP, the price problem but not the GDP problem. With the green line, they fix the GDP problem but not the price problem. So let's go back to our question, and we see that the only answer is that they can't stabilize both. They can work on one but not the other, but they cannot stabilize both the price level and the GDP simultaneously. We can check that, and we're told we have done nice work. All right, I hope that helps. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask.